Prior to the premiere of his first symphony in 1955, even before immigrating to England in 1939, following the Republican defeat by the Nationalists in the Spanish Civil War, Roberto Gerard had already gained international accolades for such works as his overtly Catalan cantata, a modernist work which won first prize at the 1933 International Society for Contemporary Music Festival celebrated in Amsterdam. After the fall of Barcelona on January 26, 1939, many Catalan intellectuals fled Catalonia for France. Concerns of the likelihood of German occupation and deportation back to Spain, many Catalans escaped to Mexico, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, and Cuba. For instance, Roberto Gerard's brother, Carlos, who had served in the Catalan Autonomous Administration of the Monastery of Montserrat during the Spanish Civil War, exiled to Mexico. Addressing the perceived experiences of Catalans in exile and their diasporic communities within Latin America, Spanish scholar Isabel Alvarez Sancho writes that Catalan exile was considered to be a great hardship. Many thought of themselves as doubly exiled, as if their culture and even Catalonia itself had left in exile with them. In 1939, with the end of the Spanish Civil War, Gerard's political and cultural ties with the Republicans forced him to leave Spain. Briefly exiled in France, he ultimately settled in Cambridge, England, through the generosity of the musicologist and Cambridge professor Edward Dent. Gerard's exile to Cambridge, England, differed from the diasporic experience of many other Catalans. In England, Gerard would have struggled to maintain a separate sense of Catalan identity. Most English would have been fundamentally oblivious to the regional differences within Spain. The Franco-era tourism slogan, "Spain is different," as well as its advertising campaign, portrayed Spain as exotic while also erasing regional differences, highlighting bullfighting and flamenco music. As Malcolm MacDonald remarks in his Oxford Online entry on Roberto Gerard, it is ironic that Gerard's most financially rewarding work was dependent on his perceived Spanish identity. Gerard's reputation as a composer in Britain developed slowly because of British nationalistic sentiments during and immediately after World War II, which prompted institutions such as the BBC and London orchestras to put much of their energy into the promotion of native composers, culminating in the Festival of Britain in 1951. But a return to prosperity in England during the late 1950s brought with it a more international outlook. Gerard's presence in Britain and readiness to assume British nationality were properly appreciated starting in the late 1950s. In the September 1956 issue of The Score, celebrating Gerard's 60th birthday, William Gluck opened the periodical with the remarks that lamented the British reception of Gerard's music. For whatever reason, his works have been almost entirely ignored, with the result that 20th century music has been robbed of the impact of one of its most vital representatives. Only 4 comparatively minor works of Roberto Gerard have ever been printed. Many first performances have also been the last, and that, as far as England is concerned, only 2 or 3 of his major works have ever been heard in public. Nor does he receive any consideration in the critical writings on contemporary music. Observing that the music of Gerard did not belong to the Franco-Hispanic style, Gluck partially explains the grounds for the difficulties of the British public, claiming that Gerard refuses to fit into any convenient category, for even his Spanish qualities are not of the familiar kind. Late in his career, Gerard once again received international recognition, accepting commissions from the Koussevitzky Foundation, Fromm Foundation, Cheltenham Festival, and the BBC. 2 years after Gerard's death, Francis Ruth included a lengthy discussion and praise of Roberto Gerard in his book, Contemporary British Music, The 25 Years from 1945 to 1970, albeit in the section titled British by Choice, The Influence of Other Traditions. Ruth recounts a conversation overheard between Gerard and a copyist during the rehearsal of Gerard's Fourth Symphony. After the copyist suggests a certain passage be removed, which Ruth suggests throws a light on Gerard's personality as well as his music, an element of seriousness is concealed in true Anglo-Saxon style. Gerard: "You are lucky I am not Schoenberg. He would have bitten your head off." "I knew you would not bite my head off." "You should have said, 'I am not Schoenberg.' Perhaps one Schoenberg is enough." "One Schoenberg is more than enough." In this paper, I will address how and why Gerard's compositional framework shifted from Catalan nationalism to a brief period of excursions of Spanish exoticism after his exile to England. In the evaluation of the Catalan-born composer's total output, the early works of Gerard reflect the shifting cultural discourse within Catalan nationalism at the beginning of the 20th century. As a means of fostering cultural independence from the rest of Spain, Catalan national sentiment gradually switched to the promotion of modernist ideologies, which were previously rejected in the defense and preservation of traditional culture. During this period, Gerard was un català mundial, an international Catalan, longing to participate in the greater musical world of modernism. His musical activities in composition, research, and criticism echoed this shifting cultural discourse within Catalonia, which was cut short by the Spanish Civil War. In 1932, alongside surrealist painter Joan Miró, architect Josep Lluís Sert, and arts promoter Joan Prats i Vallès, Gerard established the Amics de l'Art Nou, Friends of New Art, promoting the Catalan avant-garde arts. During the early 1930s, 8 Catalan composers known as the Compositors Independents de Catalunya, Independent Composers of Catalonia, representing an array of modern musical practices, organized themselves in Barcelona as a unified collective with the overriding objective of presenting modern music as a representation of Catalan culture to the greater public, while unified with Gerard in their acceptance of contemporary approaches to music. The composers Frederic Montpeau, Agustí Grau, Joan Guibert Camins, Eduard Toldrà, Manuel Blancafort, Baltasar Samper, and Ricard Lamote remained nevertheless heterogeneous in their personal compositional styles. Among the Compositors Independents de Catalunya, Gerard remained the only composer of the group unmistakably influenced by the Second Viennese School. Blancafort contended that Catalan composers should not exploit traditional music. Instead, he advocated employing a universal vocabulary. Our music has to be Catalan, but it is essential to avoid Catalan folk vestiges such as folk festivals and the Porron. Nowadays in Catalonia, there exist more than shepherds and peasants. Abroad, a Catalan should not be a picturesque and exotic person, like that of the comedies of the past century. Our music must be something more than a sardana and a traditional song. It has to speak of Catalan things in a European language. Addressing previous Catalan music, Blancafort claimed that both Albéniz and Granados did not compose Catalan music. Without identifying further individuals, Blancafort stated that too many Catalan composers relied on inflammatory patriotic text, claiming that without such text, those works would never receive an audience. Lastly, he addressed nationalism, suggesting that nationalism was too often confused with populism. Before exile, Gerard had composed for the BBC. The intended audience of his Albada, Interludi y Danza was English, not Spanish or Catalan. At the time, interest in Spanish music by the British public was due largely to the news and events related to the Spanish Civil War. In stark contrast to Gerard's other compositions of the period, he eschewed many of his modernist applications in the composition of Albada, Interludi y Danza. In 1937, the work premiered on radio with a BBC broadcast, the BBC Orchestra performing, and Gerard conducting. The symphonic work received a second performance in 1938 at Queen's Hall as part of the International Society for Contemporary Music Festival held in London, and supposedly Bela Bartok, who was in attendance, gave the work high praise. Albala Interludi y Danza received its Catalan premiere later in 1938. The program notes of the International Society for Contemporary Music performance positioned Albala Interludi y Danza within the context of the Spanish Civil War, explaining the circumstances of the occasion most certainly determined the inspiration of the work, for the composer's circumstances were those of Spain today, dominated by one element, the tension of populism. The title of the work evokes Catalonia's past and present, the troubadour genre song known as Alba, and the traditional festival music performed at daybreak called Albada. The music brings to mind traditional Catalan music, as the program note explains. The nature of the song makes it, in a way, the antithesis of the nocturne, and the composer's idea has been to write a kind of morning serenade in a very simple form, using tunes that are popular in spirit, though not in origin. Evoking the traditional albada with its gralles, traditional Catalan double reeds, Gerard employed oboes in parallel motion. The outer movements serve as the substantial movements of the work, albeit the entire work is an example of light music. While the work employs no key signature, each section maintains a tonal center in a manner reminiscent of Bartók. In addition, the work contains numerous ostinatos within the framework of asymmetrical rhythms. Gerard's exile in 1939 would lead to a shift of identity from Catalan to Spanish. Paradoxically, it was Gerard's perceived Spanish identity in England that finally led to financially rewarding work, requiring Gerard to write as well as present Spanish language features for the overseas service of the BBC and make arrangements of Spanish music for the BBC Concert Orchestra. Gerard made Spanish-like arrangements for the BBC Orchestra under the pseudonym Juan Serralonga, in a tongue-in-cheek reference to the 17th century Catalan Robin Hood-like bandit that fought against Castilian oppression. Beyond the work for hire, many of Gerard's serious works also became more pan-Hispanic and accessible during this period of exile. In Cancionero de Pedrell, Gerard utilized songs collected by his former teacher Felipe Pedrell, which included folk songs from different parts of Spain. Gerard chose traditional songs from Mallorca, Catalonia, Asturias, Galicia, and Valencia to add picturesque orchestral accompaniment. Here's Muero Yo.
Si porque te quiero quieres que yo la muerte reciba, cúmplase tu voluntad, muera yo porque otro viva, que capaz quieres que me desbarra la saya verde y el de la paz. Y ese miriña que negro, y ese bonito de andar, que compañeros que bajas más con los corales y las batallas.
Gerard completed music for the ballet Don Quixote between 1940 and 1941, which he developed from an extended BBC dramatization of the Cervantes novel. year later, Gerard explored flamenco music in his ballet with its bullfighting scenario, and later as an orchestral suite, Alegrias. Gerard's only opera, The Dueña, was based on the Sheridan comedy, which is set in Seville, Spain. Gerard recreated elements of zarzuela and the tonadilla escénica for the 1949 BBC broadcast. The Dueña was staged posthumously in 1992, receiving a British premiere. In 1956, Gerard revisited flamenco music in his Cantares, 7 Spanish songs for voice and guitar, which often employs flamenco rasgueado-like strumming. This is Arenas de la Baraja. While maintaining the Catalan pronunciation of his family name, Gerard assumed the Castilian form of Roberto in exile. So too did Gerard's compositional framework shift from expressing his sentiments of Catalan nationalism to momentarily taking excursions of Spanish exoticism or identity. Gerard became the most significant Iberian composer of the generation after Manuel de Falla, and one of the most important early electronic music composers of Britain. Paradoxically, after the Spanish Civil War, Gerard was perceived as a Catalan and therefore banned in Franco's Spain, and a Spaniard in England, delaying his international recognition. Thank you.